here. Welcome again. So we're kind of switching things up a little bit this week because next week I have a communion service to go to on Tuesday night. So we're not going to meet next week. And being that next week is the first Tuesday, figure we just switch it up with this week. We'll do Friends, Food, and Faith this week. And then this Tuesday of Octave, we'll go back to Bother the Father. So what I wanted to kind of talk about tonight was evangelization. So I think for a lot of people, that's a very mystical word. A lot of people hear evangelization, they can either have one of two reactions to it. Either, oh yeah, great, yes, good. Or I don't know what that is, and I'm going to shy away from that, right? That's not me. Well, and it's interesting because I think we tend to hear that word and we think of like, well, that's what Jesus did. Yeah. And so if we're followers of Jesus, we should follow what he does. Now, that doesn't mean that we should maybe need to go door to door and ring doorbells and knock on doors and talk about Jesus, everybody. And that could be beneficial. And that actually, there's a religious order we have here in they're actually out of Springfield, but we have a congregation of them here in St. Louis called the Society of Mother of Peace. May have seen them. They are primarily from African brothers and sisters. Some are priests. They are usually distinguished in the fact they actually wear a blue cassock. And so we had some of those guys with us in the seminary at Kenrick. Some of them became archdiocesan priests. One of them was my brother priest and my classmate, Father Samuel Inameti. He left that order before we started Theology 1. And one of the reasons was they were going through just like maybe an all things new type situation where they're trying to understand what their charism was. And it was kind of, I think they were trying to get apostolic recognition. They were actually Episcopal recognition out of Springfield, Cape. And they were trying to get the apostolic recognition. And it was the Congregation for Orders apparently had a question about, well, if your charism is evangelization, why do you need them all to become priests? Very good question. And I think that was really discerned well. And they said, yeah, maybe some of these guys don't need to become priests. And so those guys who felt called to priesthood, they said, well, I'm called to be a priest. So we had a lot of guys leave the order and then come into the archdiocesan ranks, which was beneficial for us for sure. But their charism, they would go up every weekend to North City and they would just kind of walk around the neighborhoods and engage with people and talk about their faith. And what was interesting is when you would go up there with them, they always went in twos. Obviously, because where two or more are present, that's where Jesus is present. One would discuss while the other one would pray. And so typically they would just kind of switch off. Every house they went to or first they visit, one would be kind of the mouthpiece, the other one would be the silent partner, which would be praying the entire time. And that's kind of how they conducted their affairs. A lot of those men that became priests, they still have that great drive for that kind of thing. And even now, I think one of the priests from that order is now an archdiocesan priest, Father Peter Famega, who's now the pastor of St. Norbert, has really kind of brought that into his ministry up there too, which has been phenomenal. I think Father Samuel has a call and wants to go up to North City eventually and become a pastor there. And we'll see what happens. All things new, that might be the case. We don't know. But that's kind of how they evangelize. Now, that worked for them, right? Not everybody is called to do that. So for those who are not called to maybe do the door-to-door mission with another brother or sister, how do they evangelize? Because we all are called to do that, right? I think the thing we need to keep in mind, and this is, I think, should be the driving theme when it comes to evangelization. And we can look at different aspects of Jesus' life and see how he did this too. But I think the best line about evangelization comes from St. Francis of Assisi. So St. Francis of Assisi, of course, was a 13th century saint. He founded the Franciscan order. He was not ordained a priest. He was a deacon, right? Because he didn't actually want to be ordained. But because when he petitioned the Pope to become a religious order, the Pope thought it good that there should be some ordained clergy to lead the order. And so he convalesced becoming a deacon, right? But the Franciscans, they also have priests and sisters and other consecrated and ordained life. I don't know if they actually take the vow where they can't become bishops. Well, actually, no, I take that back. I think isn't I think the Archbishop of Boston, Cardinal, oh man, it's escaped my mind now, but I believe he was a Franciscan. I don't know if he had to dispense with those vows, but I don't know if they take that same vow like Jesuits do, like not to become bishops. But then, hey, look how far that got us too, right? Anyway, what Francis used to say is evangelize always, and if necessary, use words. Right? So I think that's actually really profound and significant when it comes to evangelization. Because I think what it recognizes that everybody is made uniquely in many ways and given different gifts and talents. And we're all called to use those gifts and talents to bring people closer to Jesus. And so what that means is I might not have the gift of gab like other people that can actually engage well in conversation. And maybe I can't even engage well in conversation about my faith. But you know what? I can live it authentically in the way that God calls me to. Right? So maybe I do engage my faith in other ways, like I attend Mass. I think that's really significant. It's funny, I'm meeting with the second grade families on Thursday night because Monsignor Shamliffer is on the retreat for the Acts retreat. So I'll be kind of walking with the parents in kind of preparing for First Communion for their children. And I think what's kind of significant, what I've observed, not just with the second graders, but also the eighth graders. And it's funny, at certain grade levels, you see more families come to Mass than maybe others. So it's kind of all over the place. But we haven't seen a lot of engagement with the second grade families or with the eighth grade families. Mm. And it's interesting because those are the grade levels that are receiving sacraments here this year, right? And I wonder why that is. When it comes to evangelization, I think that's got to be key. I think we have to return to the source of the faith to receive that grace in the Eucharist to go out and be those evangelizers. And again, not necessarily browbeating, not necessarily like, condemning anybody. I don't think that's what we were called to do in evangelization. I think we're called to engage and invite. I think that's kind of the key when it comes to evangelization. And so that starts, I think, and we talked about this a little bit before, I think, in other aspects, I think it starts relational. So one thing I've been kind of discerning what I'm going to talk about, and I think I'm going to kind of focus a little bit on Genesis. Because I think, one thing that's, I think, interesting with Genesis, and we see this really how God interacts with Adam and Eve. After the fall, God kind of comes down and he says something very interesting. I think it's kind of overlooked sometimes, but I think it's very significant. He starts with Adam and Eve and says, "Where are you?" Now, I think that's actually a very good question to ask, right? Because first off, it's not that God didn't know where Adam and Eve was. He knew what happened. He knew what they did. He knew where they were. But I think what God was trying to do there, and this is not definitively taught, but I think it's an interesting point. I think he was trying to invite them. He was trying to invite them to kind of fess up to what they did. And I wonder, and I think many theologians kind of, discuss this and ponder this over the centuries, what would have happened if instead of Adam coming out and said, "Well, hey, you gave me her, that you're the one that did it. I mean, you're the one that sent her to me." Right. And if she didn't say, "Well, you really want to be the servant here, and he's the one that kind of, whatever." If Adam would just come out, it's like, "I'm sorry. I know I screwed up. I'm sorry."
Things might have been totally
maybe, right? Maybe. I mean, I think there's something significant about that in the way that God interacted with them. He was trying to engage them and say, "I'm giving you an opportunity here." Right? And I think that's a good way. And even in actually the 4th chapter of Genesis, when we see this interaction between Cain and Abel, God does kind of the same thing. After Cain slew Abel, buries him, God comes and says, "Where's your brother?" Obviously, he knew where Abel was, but Cain says something very kind of the same way as Adam and Eve, kind of more flippant. "Well, my brother's keeper." Am I supposed to be taking care of him?
You're about to find out.
And well, and see, this thing, this kind of rhetorical, but the answer is, of course you are. That's the whole Jesus. That's Jesus' whole mission, right? You're your neighbor, your brother. That's someone you should love and care about, right? And you want the good for. Even your enemies, you should love, which is much more difficult than worse your brother, right? But I think God always does that. And I think that's a good question not only ask ourselves, where are we? Right? Where's my brother? Where's my sister? I mean, even to the same extent, what would have happened if Abel, or sorry, if Cain would have been like, I got angry, I got jealous. Sorry.
Well,
Especially,
I have a question about that. As Helen, I mean, we know that, God might have watched dinosaurs playing with his morning coffee, and he's, looking toward the end of the world right now. So when you say, what if, well, there wasn't gonna be an if. I mean, he knew. And I told you what Helen says. God, you didn't have to put that tree there.
Yeah. Well, and
Helen says that.
Well, but see, I think that's the thing, though, right? I mean, it's what it shows. I think also is the immense respect and the immense gift that we're given in free will. Because we going back to I think we talked about this with the tree, right?
Yeah.
And my theory on that is we go back to Genesis again, that when God brought the animals to Adam, right? Yeah. Okay, you're naming these animals, and you're going to have some authority over them, right? You have a caretaker's responsibility for these things you're naming because you're naming them. You take responsibility, ownership of them.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Right. So, okay, good, but that wasn't really the main purpose in that action. What God was trying to do there was to help Adam understand that he's the only one like himself. So when he brings these animals to Adam and saying, okay, you're naming them, or eventually he's like, oh, okay, well, there's these things that have these long necks and these long legs, and they eat this grass. Okay, well, giraffes. Okay, great. Okay, there's a lot of them. Okay, that's interesting. That's not like me, but okay. Okay, you have these furry things with like 4 paws and these big puffy manes, and you have these other ones that have don't have a mane, but they have like the same body structure. One's male, one's female. Okay, they have different genitalia. Lions. Okay, fine. What eventually he's going through these things saying, oh, wow, these all have something like them.
Yeah.
But I don't. And it wasn't until Adam got to that point that God then gave him Eve. Because as God knows our human nature just does more than we do, he knew we had to grow in that to understand it before we can actually receive the gift well. Because that's what Eve was. And Adam was a gift to her as Eve was a gift to him. And it wouldn't have been appreciated or responded well if that wasn't understood first. So we talk about these 2 trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? So it's interesting that they chose knowledge of good and evil first before they chose the tree of life. We can ask that question, well, why did you do that, Lord? What was that all about? Well, I think it's the same lesson that we understand with the naming of the animals. There was a restriction put on them so they could grow in their appreciation of it and grow on their dependence in God before they're actually going to be given the gift of the fruit of those trees. So I think that's kind of something to ponder. Although what happened was, though, well, we want it now. I don't want to wait. I don't want to grow in these things. Why can't you just snap your fingers and give it to me? Could God have done that? Certainly could have. But then also, would that have been a loving act and also respected the free will of humanity?
And is that what happened? I mean, did Adam have language to name 1,000,000?
Well, Adam would have had intellect. So with intellect would have come communication. So maybe. That's, you know, in language and in communication, there are many forms of that. Wouldn't have been necessarily written.
Well, like I said, so he created an entire universe of an ocean full of animals, all of them had a mate.
Yep.
And then he had to do surgery because, well, Adam didn't have a mate.
Well, I think to that end though, what's interesting though is if you look at the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah.
You know, God is breathing life in Adam, you know, the life spark. What's kind of fascinating is in the crook of his arm, you actually see Eve. Right?
I didn't know this.
Yeah, maybe I can, well, I don't know if I can pull that up here, but yeah. So I mean, that was actually an intentional thing done by Michelangelo. Because what that showed is that was always God's plan.
Yeah.
But Adam had to choose it.
Oh, okay.
Right, he had to realize it, right? And so in the same way, this choice that we have is a gift from God to choose him or not. And the problem with the reception of that gift of the knowledge of good and evil before we were ready for it, that makes it disordered in the way we perceive things and the way we actually reason through things. Because now we're actually directed towards earthly pleasure and stuff than the heavenly one. So, hence we have this shift in the relationship between humanity and God. But God still respects the act of the will because he gave it to us as a gift, right? Yeah, so you could argue, well, why didn't God just make us do the right thing? Well, that would not have been an act of love.
Would it save me some headache?
Sure, well, all of us. But I guess here's the question though.
All this free will,
yeah,
it's got my way.
Well, would it be better for God to force us to love him or for us to choose that love?
Well, if we acknowledge that he is our creator, we are forced to love him because.
Oh, well, I wouldn't go that far. I would say I would say we'd be compelled, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Force is a different thing.
Yeah, but well, it's the same with the angels. The angels are in whatever we perceive heaven is, perfection.
Right.
And they choose to be in hell.
Sure.
Because they're that prideful, they choose an eternity of misery.
Well, I think that's
more stubborn than my family.
Well, I mean, it's not really. See, that's thing. It's not with the angels. It's not necessarily an action of stubbornness.
Well,
it's an action. It's not really pride. It's actually they are perceiving, or actually, they are intuiting that over God. Yeah, well, that's a good question, right? Because we don't have the knowledge of an angel.
Yeah.
We err in our deliberation because of that, preemptive taking of the fruit, right? And so that's why we can be forgiven.
Yeah.
Right? Because I screwed up. I didn't decipher that well. And I recognize that and I'm sorry. Okay. Forgiven. Angels don't do that. Angels don't reason, they know. Right? And so the fact they're choosing that with the knowledge they have, it makes it incredibly tragic.
And stupid.
Well, yeah, we would say from our perspective, yeah, that's kind of stupid, right? But also humans do the same thing.
Well, we do have a little fail-safe.
Well, sure, we can. Well, that's that's what I'm saying. In that way, that's what makes it so even more tragic. That they even know they don't have a fail-safe, yet they're still like, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to put that understanding because it's beyond us, right? Yeah, we can sit here and say, well, I mean, knowing what I know about God, and know what I experience about God. Well, that's another thing too. Angels don't experience. So that may be one of the aspects of that too.
Well, aren't they experiencing now?
Well, so to experience, you have to have senses. You have to have a body.
Right? How much entertainment can they have prowling about the world, seeking the ruin of souls when all the souls are gone?
Well, I mean,
I mean, I've got one that lives in here,
maybe,
puts me
maybe,
to sleep every
maybe,
morning
maybe, well, that's the other thing though, too, is that
when it's time to go to mass.
maybe that's the tragedy of it though, Christine, is that there is like this lacking there that was either not, I don't, for lack of a better word, seen. Again, we're trying to put these human
Yeah.
understandings, things that is above our understanding. Yeah, I mean, I can't say because I don't know. But I would say, but we also see people who make bad choices and even who persist in it. So maybe there's something akin to that in the angelic nature. I don't know, but still makes it tragic.
Oh.
So, yeah. So when it comes back to these understanding of evangelization, I think these are important questions to ask ourselves in this matter. Okay, if I am my brother's keeper, right, and I know where I'm at, what does that mean? How do I use my gifts and talents to actually bring others closer to Christ? Well, I think that's the thing. Is part is knowing what our talents are. And part of that's growing in those things. So it starts relationally. Okay, I have a good friend and I see them doing something, maybe that's not best for them. Okay, what's the best way for me to engage with them? Well, maybe it's not a conversation. Maybe it's I go for the Blessed Sacrament and pray for them. Or I pray for an opportunity to engage with them in this respect. Or I pray for an act of conversion. Or maybe I pray for somebody else to come in their life that can actually lead them to this greater good for them. Maybe that's the best I can do. Maybe my gift is I'm a little more blunt than others, right? I think that's one of the things too, we tend to, and that's I think based on the personality type, or some would say even maybe the spiritual gifts given to certain people, right? That we tend to think of bluntness as being synonymous with meanness. And maybe it is. But I think it's also interesting that nowhere in scripture or in the teaching of the apostles does Jesus tell us to be nice to one another. Now, what God does call us to, though, is kindness. And one may ask, what's the difference? So maybe I'll ask you, what is the difference between niceness and kindness?
Well, niceness is something you can just slather all over people. Kindness has to be substantial.
I think that's true. I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think one distinctions would be that kindness is always in line with charity and truth.
Yeah.
Niceness may not be. So for instance, it's always good, maybe give an example. Let's say your friend gets a new hat. And you think that hat looks horrible, right? It's a putrid color. Maybe it's like, a brown. It just doesn't fit the shape of their friend's head. But well, again, okay, so maybe that's a good example too. And let's say your friend comes to you and says, "What do you think of my new hat?" To be nice would say, "Oh, your hat looks great. Wonderful," right? Kindness would be, it doesn't matter what I think about your hat. As long as you're happy with the hat, that's all that really matters.
But the happy medium is, I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, it's you.
Maybe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And maybe right. So again, that's still in line with truth and kindness, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's
And then
really the
she's
key.
gonna say you hate it, don't you?
Well, maybe she
Then you're
might.
gonna say,
Yeah.
oh.
But here's the thing about that too, right? Because that relationship we already established that person, that would be okay.
Yeah, you and your sister.
Well,
did that.
oh, I didn't say anything because we rode together to a birthday party.
And that's prudence.
But also, if she liked it, I just kept my mouth shut and she didn't ask me. But, I find the people who are blunt, you're okay with it.
Yeah.
Because they're blunt.
Because you know who they are.
You know.
But see, that's why that establishes the relationship you have with them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because if you know that about a person, you still get along with them, you still like them, still interact with them. Well, good. That makes it easier, right?
Yeah.
Now that may be different than if it's a complete stranger comes and says, like, "What do you think of my hat?" looks like a scarecrow. I don't know. What do you want me to tell? What do you want me to tell you? I don't know. You're right. So I think that's the way relationships need to be established first, right? In these things. But again, it was using our talents, right? So maybe my talent isn't necessarily conversationally, but I can maybe show, yeah, right? Maybe I can actually show how I'm living my life and what brings me happiness.
It's funny you should mention that because I said to my daughter recently, and I said something, and she goes, "Oh my God, Mom, yes, people know you are Catholic." And then my girlfriend texted, "You were the most grateful person
Right.
I know, and here's what I need
Right.
from you." So I think, okay, I may not speak my faith
Yeah.
that much, but I've known this my girlfriend for
Yeah.
40 years, and she knows it's not Catholic, where I stand, and then we had one of Steve's good friends over from high school. He was in our wedding. Steve got up to go to the bathroom, and he's divorced, not Catholic. He's still looking for someone, and he's 66, and he goes, "How have you and Steve, how do you seem so happy, and you've made it all these years?" And I said, "Our faith."
Yeah.
And I said, "Paul," because I've asked him a couple times, he doesn't have a faith.
Right.
Come and check out the Catholic faith.
yeah.
I said, that is why we are joyful. That's why we're happy.
And I think that also points to another. So how long have you known this person?
Oh my gosh, 50 years.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing to point out too. It's not a short game. Right?
Yeah.
Evangelization is not a short-term game, right? And here's the other thing that I think we have to struggle with, and I know priests and clergy and religious deal with this all the time, but anybody in ministry has to actually kind of struggle with this. I also have to recognize what my role may be. So my job may be just to plant the seed. My job might just be to water the ground. Maybe my job is to maybe add a little fertilizer here and there. And all analogies fall short. Somebody. Maybe to remove some shade or allow some sunshine in. But the thing I need to recognize too is I may not see the fruit. I may not see the fruit. And I have to be okay with that.
Well, that's.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, you're but
you do.
You're right. You now here's I will qualify this by saying we want to see some fruit. We have that desire to see, and maybe we want to see all the fruit.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But also too, it might be we also trust that God's going to provide those opportunities for us to bear witness to it too. Maybe not in every circumstance, maybe not in most circumstances. But we have to trust that God's going to give us that, because that also is going to be urging us on too. But also, what if we don't? That may be a struggle, and that might be a cross. But there's also going to be bearing fruit in that too.
And the cross.
And we'll see, but here's the thing, right? Because that actually is a form of evangelization too. Right? That when I bear the cross with joy, when I suffer well, that's attractive. We have a whole sacrament dedicated to it, which is one of the most least understood sacraments of the entire Catholic faith, I think. Second only, the second, a close follow-up would be confirmation. Most people don't understand that sacrament at all. But I think more people don't understand the sacrament of anointing. Mostly because it's usually done at the end of someone's life, typically. Not always. I think we've kind of understood that a little bit better recently than in prior years. But the sacrament of anointing, there are effects of that are good. So with the hope of healing, sure. Forgiveness of sins. That's not the primary effect of it, though, right? The primary effect of the sacrament of anointing of the sick is that we conform our suffering to Jesus, bear the cross with him, and receive grace to be a dignified model of suffering.
Did not know that. Did you know that? I figured it was okay. I'm going to get all these sins taken out so that when.
Well, yeah.
Breath.
Yeah. So, I mean, and typically the reason we do that in the three sacraments of confession Because if someone were unconscious and couldn't confess, well, we still
Right.
want them to be forgiven of their sins. Which is why even if you're conscious, we should have confession with it.
Right.
Wouldn't be necessary because it does forgive your sins, but that's not really how the church envisions it. Still okay, though. But the main purpose of the sacrament of anointing is that we are dignified in the way we suffer. That we're become models of Christ on the cross for others. Because every sacrament has a mission associated with it too, right? That's our mission.
Well, I lost 2 cousins.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
And one of them, I found out when I was late last week for the 5 o'clock benediction. I took a minute to call my cousin, her ex-husband, and was having some spinal testing. Well, she said Ken has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And I just wept all through the mass, and all I'm thinking for one entire week is F.
Yeah, yeah, right. That's a powerful blessing.
But I had no control.
Sure.
And finally, we had a big birthday, 80th birthday party for one of my cousins, and Carol ran out to pick up her son. They went to the hospital, so Keith wanted Carol and his dad and his sister and him together. The ex-wife was, or the new wife was busy somewhere, but that's all I could think of is, I said, Carol, has Breeze been there? He's not ready yet. And I said, Carol, hey, Breeze
Yeah.
over there.
Yeah,
And I even said,
right.
you know, I talked to I don't know if I used your name. I said, who said you need a priest at the beginning.
Right.
You don't have to be dying.
Yeah,
And,
right.
anyway, he did see a priest,
Good.
but then I found out today that my cousin Gary, who's been kind of estranged from the family, an alcoholic, a lifelong alcoholic, who's 4 days older than me. His birthday would have been the 9th. And he died in February. And I've talked to Father about my hobby of scrupulosity. And, you know, OCD and scrupulosity, you just want to smear that all over everybody.
Sure, yeah.
Everybody in the family, and I just feel it at all times.
Yeah.
And I just need to clean up this whole, I've got a notebook full of like 300 people.
Yeah.
People I knew when I was a child.
All right.
People I worked at Woolworth with when I was 16. And I just feel, I just needed. Well, I came back full into the church. I was always Catholic, but a year ago in March. And I started listening to these podcasts. And there's this Father Chris Alar, I don't know if you've heard of him. His speeches are like an hour and a half. They're well researched. And he always says, I'm taking you back to seminary. But he shouts the whole time. And he says things like something about the Blessed Mother. And he'll say, listen, fantastic stuff.
It's good to see zeal.
It's not stuff. It's not stuff. But anyway, he said he earns a plenary indulgence every day. And then he keeps one for himself at the end of the month. Well, think about it. If you earn a plenary indulgence every day, you don't need one at the end of the month.
Well, here's the, I mean, yeah, it's why.
So that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, we go in that discussion a little bit, later, but I mean, it's, yeah, plenary indulgences are very good.
Since the more you tell me about what you're hearing, not just him, the farther I'm getting from my church.
Right. Well, that's the thing about it. I think it's so difficult to, and that's why we have to trust in the mercy of God to say, I have plenary indulgence for myself. Okay, so to have that actually be the case, I have to be completely rid of any temporal attachment that I have.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, didn't you say between confession and the indulgence, not forever?
Right. Well, but that's why it's also like for myself, Well, that's why it wouldn't be good for me to keep it for myself, because as soon as I have desire for a steak and I eat a steak, I've lost that indulgence for myself. Right? Because that's an earthly attachment. Right? And so I think that's, now maybe I don't want to judge Father, maybe he does. I don't know. But all I know is, for me, that's almost impossible for myself.
Even if it's humble can of tuna?
Even as a humble can of tuna. Because if I have that desire for the tuna, well, then I've lost my indulgence.
Yeah.
Right.
And I do understand that, but I will say that this neighbor started saying the rosary every day because I say the rosary every day. And
Well, but see,
I'm so proud of that.
but I think that's what we're talking about, though, right? That's an example.
Yeah.
It's part of the example, and I think that's whatever state of life we find ourselves in, we're a state of suffering or pain, or a state of joy and happiness. I think we have to be, we're called to be those examples of Christ.
Yeah.
And that's what the sacrament of, but I think that also, in line with what we're talking about with the anointing the sick, that stems from our sacramental life in the church too.
Yeah.
Right? So we can't give we don't have. So if we don't go to these sacraments and receive these graces that God wants to give us, how can we be the channels of grace to others for those things? And so that's why I like to talk about the second graders coming up. I mean, it's a struggle. Because
say the parents, where are you?
Well, see, that's what I'm kind of looking at. I mean, so it's one of these things where I think it's one of these things where you kind of have to engage and say, you have a responsibility as a parent, right?
Yeah.
Your job as a parent is to.
It's like, don't get them baptized if you're not.
Well, and see, and that's always a struggle too, because here's the thing. Well, but here's the thing there, Mary Helen. And I think this is a struggle with everyone struggles with this too. Is it better for them to be baptized or not? So I would trust in the grace given in baptism. That's a good, even if there's not someone there to actually teach them the faith. Because my thought is, well, the grace of sacrament could still take hold. Now, granted, there should be, usually it falls on the role of the godparents, if that's not the case with the parents. And typically you would want, that's when we talk to these when they come down for these baptismal classes. One thing I know I'm very clear with, and I know Deacon Dave is clear with them too, is, the godparent shouldn't just be an honorific title for somebody. Well, my older brother, it should be someone that actually is engaged with the faith. Because the main job of the godparent is, I think this was misunderstood too. It's not like if you die, they're going to take over raising your child. Now, part of that's kind of implied in the fact of what the godfather for parent is, because they're meant to help the parents raise the child in the faith. The main job of a godparent, though, is to pray for that child throughout their entire life. And be there if the parents need some help in raising in the faith or have a question of faith, which means that's why they should be practicing. Same thing with sponsor confirmation, right?
Yeah, I have 4 godsons.
Yeah.
3 of them Catholic.
Yep.
And
well, it's funny,
one's estranged from the family for 10 years now.
My oldest. So before I was ordained, I was my sister had a child. When I was in my theology 3-year, my oldest niece, love her. She's the apple of my eye. And if since I was not ordained, I couldn't ordain her or couldn't baptize her. Well, I could have, but not illicitly. So I was asked to be the godfather, and I was very honored. I pray for her daily. I do, and and even like, it's funny. I even keep. You see, with priests, I always keep they always put names and post-it notes and their particular rite books, whatever. And I do that for weddings. I do that for funerals and baptisms, and I keep them. I keep them in the front cover of the book. Because every once in a while I'll go through them and start just kind of praying for the different ones that I've done, but I think that's kind of a misunderstood thing too when it comes to these things, whether it be confirmation sponsors or godparents. That's the role, right? And so with these, talk about evangelization. I mean, I think part of that's helping the parents realize why, or maybe even invite them and ask this question. If it is a priority for you, good. What are we doing then to bring others with us? And if it isn't, well, why not? Right? So I think that needs to be asked. And I think it needs to be asked often. So again, it goes back to, where are you? Right? So I think I might start that with that gospel reading. that scripture reading on. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's but that's the thing. Evangelization, I think, is it's inspired. It stems from our sacramental life of the church, and we got to do it in the way that we find ourselves, right? So the way that you as lay people evangelize is going to be different than the way I do, and it should be, right? Because, and I talk about this example often. There's people in my family who don't practice the faith, and I struggle with that because what is my role there, right? Am I the most effective person to actually do these things for them? In other words, because of the familiar relationship of prophets never welcome his own home, and also the fact of who I am now, is that going to fall on deaf ears? It'll just be, well, I'm towing the company line, right? So my prayer typically in those circumstances, that I pray that someone comes in their life that will lead them back or lead them to the truth. Because I know I'm very aware that that may not be me. But I also think what's kind of fascinating is how much evangelization happens at these these kind of milestone moments in life. How fundamental it is when like a baptism occurs, or when a wedding happens, or a first communion, or a confirmation, or even a funeral. It's amazing how funerals engage people in some ways. I think it's because of remembrance of our own mortality. And it's actually a moment to kind of like search ourselves and ask that same question, where am I? Right.
Well, it's also an opportunity to challenge.
And that so yeah, there's actually schools of thought on that too. There's a brother priest of mine that says, and I think this is somewhat true. He would say that funerals are not opportunities for or not opportunities for catechesis. There's some truth there, right? Yeah.
Well,
but not evangelization for sure.
In our family,
yeah,
funerals were a big deal because my dad died at 45.
Yeah,
that's young. Youngest.
Yeah,
he was the first of 9, but everybody who was smoking stopped. Everybody who wasn't smoking started. Same with drinking. Yeah. But my youngest brother had a terrible cancer when he turned 40. And I called my Aunt Joan, his godmother, who has been an atheist for many years. And I just said, Joan, you damn well better be praying. Yeah. You know what she said to me? I am. Yeah.
Well, I think.
Now,
I think there's an old adage there. There are no atheists in foxholes.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, so you could be and I don't know if there really are even really true atheists out there. Really, I think most people are more agnostic.
I have a cousin, and I had an employer who was also a friend. Both of them are Bible thumpers. Okay. Love to argue about the Bible.
Wonderful.
And Carl actually, I came to work one day and it was in his home on Flora. He had an office in the home. And he's out on the porch with this Jehovah's Witness lady. Bumping on that Bible, and then I go on upstairs to work, and then I hear him playing the grand piano. He's giving her a little concert of religious music. And I used to say to him, Carl, you're going to make eternity longer for all of us. Well, I just feel like if you're still engaged, you are not all finished.
Yeah, of course, right, yeah.
But the funny thing about Carl, he was very generous, very noble man. His 2 brothers married Mexican women. They were on vacation. They each met someone, married and brought him back to the States. Well, he was the one of the sons' godfather, and then his brother Alan died. Well, the mother didn't go to church anymore, so Carl went to Kirkwood, dragged the kid out of bed, dressed him up, took him to mass every Sunday.
Good for him. Yeah.
because he was the godfather.
Well, and I think that actually kind of adds to another aspect of this when we talk about evangelization. And, we talk about these responsibilities of parents and whatever else. What's actually, I think, kind of interesting, and this research was actually done in I think it was a Methodist church, the Methodist church. I don't know, it's been expanded on, maybe needs more, looking at, but they were looking at like families went to mass, went to church services there. And they found that if the father figure was engaging with the faith, that typically instilled in the younger generation. It didn't so much matter about the mom. Usually the moms were usually probably more engaged in the spiritual life than the fathers are anyway. I mean, that's usually kind of a common occurrence. But when the fathers were at least going to church, at least, the children ended up doing the same when they were older. And so again, I think it comes down to this. So the other question I think sometimes often is put out there is, how much effort do I need to put into this in order to actually evangelize? Well, I mean, you can say everything, right? Obviously. But I think also too, to make that impact, it doesn't really have to be that much. I tell the story, I think I've said in a homily before, and I don't think he'd mind me telling him, my dad, he had some temper issues. I mean, one thing about my father that I really admired, and I still do admire about him, is that, he drank for many years. And he wasn't like an abusive drunk. I mean, he was more of a happy guy. And he wouldn't do it all the time, but the weekends, yeah, he would let loose a little bit. But he stopped cold turkey. The one like just done, and he never touched it ever again. And I always thought that was admirable, right? Yeah. But one thing that he would go to mass every Sunday. He started going to mass every day after he retired, but what I've seen in him is that change. Because he used to be like early on, he was a little bit more angry. And I think part of that's because he was not drinking anymore. And so he had to kind of, fill other things. But one time, I remember one time that my sisters were asking, was like, Dad, you go to mass all the time and, you still seem like really angry. And his response was, well, imagine how it'd be if I didn't. And what a statement. I mean, that right there is a moment of evangelization.
Yeah.
And it always kind of stuck with me. And I think that's so true. That, we look at these things, talk about reason going to mass is like, well, how would I, and I think it's important also too, to maybe challenge in some ways too. Because like, I think one thing we need to look at is, and I think this is very true. I would challenge anybody to take about a month and go to mass every Sunday for the month if you aren't going to mass. And if you are going to mass, maybe engage in something else, right? Where maybe one of these things, or go to confession once, whatever. And I would wonder, this is my scientific brain coming out, just like observe how different your week is week from week, compared when you engage in that, when you don't. And if anything like my experience, I think most people experiences, there were times where I would miss mass in my 30s before I started discerning the priesthood. Not necessarily something I was really, desiring, but things happen. And my week was so much different. Things just didn't go as well. It didn't flow as well. There was these roadblocks, and yeah, right. But when I went to mass, the week, even in the struggles and tragedies, it lined up fine, right? It was easier to bear. And I wonder if that's the case for everybody.
Well, I missed mass this morning because I got locked out. And
Oh, the 8 o'clock?
yeah.
Yeah,
well,
sorry. Yeah.
I do. I have a demon living in this. Sometimes I'll give myself 10 more minutes
Right.
before I get okay.
Right.
I'm asleep.
I hear
I
you.
wake up
I hear
with
you.
the Holy.
Yeah.
But I also have construction, so I had a big earth mover at the end of the street.
Is that still going on? Wow.
Well, no, Spire is coming now.
Oh, great.
The water
Yeah.
company hasn't, I'm on Holly Hills, that 2 blocks of Holly Hills. Yeah, Spire just couldn't wait another month. And I
Well,
can't
maybe
wait.
they figure they already had it torn up. Might as well get in there now.
I can't wait till they get to my house because my brother's also an engineer and they're not putting that big honking thing on the side of my house. He has a little box like this in front of his house.
Okay,
Because when they came to him, he said, let me see this specification. And they said, let me talk to your.
it's always good to have an engineer in the family. Yeah, like,
He used to,
yeah.
he used to approve and deny specifications, but anyway. In fact, the other day I had twisted something in the back of my
Oh,
knee.
yeah.
And so I just knew I wasn't gonna make it, so I'm fixing the streaming.
Mm.
Oh,
And so I didn't even get up, I'm lying in the bed, watching it, his father, it's Monsignor Shamla.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And then I kind of shake myself, cause I started to doze. It's you, in Latin.
Oh! Was that the St. Joseph Mass? Was that
You
a
said
Monday?
something about, and here we are, the first week in something, and I thought, no, we're not. And it's you speaking in Latin, which, you know, I'm not that fine.
Sure, I know.
And, so I went right through one mass and into another.
Oh, okay,
I mean,
okay.
that's-
All right, I got you. All right, fair enough.
I'll go to sleep listening to the chaplain of St. Gertrude, and I
Okay.
apologize. All of you left at the gate, I'll catch you tomorrow, you know, for the souls of
Right,
her.
right,
And, I'll wake up with some talk from Bishop Barron or something, and my cat, so it'll be like, can we be with finished with the religion for tonight? But, I was a little aggravated.
Well,
what'd he do?
I was speaking Latin. That's why, yeah, right, yeah.
Well, I told him, when he said something about he loved the Latin mass, I
Yeah.
said, did you know Latin?
Now
Were you
I
in
do.
love with it?
Now I do. Yeah, right, yeah.
Because I was in sixth grade
Mm.
when they instituted all these changes. And it was an awakening.
Yeah.
It's in third grade, I think. Third grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, so here's the thing. Both forms I think are legitimate and valid. I love both. I think, I think a very good, well, celebrated Novus Ordo is good. I think, a well celebrated Latin mass is good. They're both Jesus. That's really the point.
Yeah,
So good.
but I love knowing the words, and I knew words,
Sure.
but I didn't know what they meant, and you could follow along.
Mhm.
But I'm telling you, when you followed along in English, you either finish first or finish way behind. So you
yeah,
weren't matching words.
that may be true, but the thing about Latin too is actually shorter for a lot of things. There's less words.
I don't think, I
Wow.
never in my life
I don't know.
been to a shorter mass than you manage even without homily.
Oh, well, yeah,
It's
that's
just
different.
20 minutes.
That's a little different though.
And I told you those children, that's
Yeah,
eternity.
right. So yeah, I think it's important to recognize these things, but I mean, when we
It
talk about.
makes a difference for me.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I think that, we'll see that,
That's my
but I
prayer.
think there's another, I think it actually has another aspect of evangelization though, too, right? I mean, so that's what the church provides in these ways. And I think it's part of that is like, I think we talk about these different personality types we have that appeals for some and appeals for others, and that's one of the beauties of it. And so the other thing I think to consider too is when we talk about like these, our personality types, they're kind of four main ones. So part of that also is understanding who we are. And I think like we talked about earlier, like if you know who you are as that person, you people that are around you can actually understand that too.
Yeah.
But there are kind of four main personality types that we kind of look at. There's sanguine, there's melancholy, there's phlegmatic, and then there's I always get the third one. It's more the type A personality, but I can't remember what that one is right now. Maybe no, it's humorous. I don't know. Anyway, but when we look at those things, and we actually also understand that about ourselves too, because that's also how we're going to evangelize. That some of this kind of more melancholy, they're more looking at maybe their pessimistic side. That doesn't mean they can't evangelize. That may be appealing to other people who are pessimistic, because again, it's that relationship that we can bond with. And some actually personality types are kind of also compatible with each other. So even though I might be sanguine, or maybe if I'm more melancholy, I might be actually have better connection with the sanguine person, right? Where I'm more phlegmatic, I might be able to get along with more of a type A personality because I don't really let things hurt me all that much, right? So it's always important to recognize that too, how we can actually engage and interact, and also know that we also, if we don't attract those other ones that are kind of counter our personality, that's okay too. Because there may be other people there to do that. And maybe that's where the prayer kind of goes to. Pray that someone with that same personality type, or a compatible one, may come to them. Right.
Yeah, and I worry, especially in the family, you
Mhm.
don't like so much to overstep. But
Sure.
with my cousin's grandchildren, I adore those children. As if they were my own grandchildren, the parents don't take them to mass.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a struggle.
And my cousin herself is the sweetest grandmother in the world, but I think if they were mine, I'd be rousting them out of bed.
Well, and
letting parents
yeah,
Sleep if they
Yeah.
wanted to and taking them, but
right.
in fact, I wrote the parents a note and I said, today's the solemnity of Saint Joseph. Saint Joseph is who Ken needs. And I copied Monsignor Schemlaufer's little prayer, little 4-line prayer for Saint Joseph. I said, this would be a good prayer for the children. And I just thought, I love Ken. He was one of my favorite cousins, even after she divorced him. And I love them all, and I'm just gonna say this, I didn't think it would offend.
Sure, yeah.
Did you hear back?
Well, there's just been all
Oh.
kinds of love going back and forth, I didn't hear anything specifically about that, but they wouldn't have been offended. But I didn't wanna say happy death.
Yeah. I think there's there's lots of engagement.
Because we were on the way, but, he's the most powerful, he's the one Ken needs, is what I said, and. But
No,
I'd
you're
like to talk to them and say,
well, I mean, that's a struggle too. I mean, we see the kids in the school. I mean, the kids that go to school here, they're all good kids.
yeah,
They all want to do right. I mean, what I found was I thought it was very amazing that this generation is how respectful they are. I think that's very true. Yeah. But I mean, but also too, I mean, there's also like, well, it's kind of sad. And when you hear confessions, I mean, whenever usually someone confesses they haven't been to mass in a while, or what they aren't going to mass, or they're missing masses. My first question is, I tend to focus on the reason why we do go. And then I talk about, well, there may be exceptions too. I mean, there's obviously weather issues. I mean, if there's a snowstorm, you can't get out of your house. Okay. If you're sick or you're taking care of someone else who's sick, I mean, that's also, or let's say you're driving to mass and you have someone on the side of the road that broke down and maybe circumstances matter in these respects. And the next I ask them is, well, can you go to mass by yourself? And I think that's the key. Now, I don't say this specifically, but I say, well, if you ask your parents taking mass and they say no, well, that's maybe the best you can do, right? That wouldn't be a sin for you. I don't go into who would be a sin for, because that's not my role. But I imagine they would maybe bring that up with their parents. I hope.
yeah,
But the charitable assumption I usually have around here is, when you look at our families in the school population, 95% are registered in this parish, but a third of those don't live in the boundary. So, okay, maybe there's a third going elsewhere. About a third you would see on Sunday, right? And then you have another third that's in the boundary, and it's like, well, maybe they're going somewhere else too. What I think was interesting is the map that came out in All Things New was those like scatter charts they show, like where people reside, where we go to mass. And you see in our neighborhood, I mean, there's a lot of people going to masses other places. That's fine. I mean, I think from an evangelistic standpoint, it's like, well, if you are getting more out of the mass, if Father Renaire has an epiphany, good. Or if you're getting more out of the mass out of Monsignor Bomarito at Joan of Arc, good. Or Father Mayo, good. That doesn't bother me. But then you start talking to the kids, not just the confessional, and they're very open and honest on the parking lot about, we didn't go. And it's rather nonchalant, and I think that's the thing about it too. And I'm always very keen in letting them know that, you know, maybe it may not be your obligation now, but there will come a time when you'll be responsible. And the concern I have is if that habit is not instilled, where's it going to come from? You know.
Oh, yeah, that's true, and that's what I think about the oldest of the boys. He just turned 14, so he'll be able to drive,
Soon, yeah.
and is it his responsibility? Is his responsibility to take his little brothers?
Well, even
If
that.
he's not in the habit of doing
Well, does he
it.
have a car? Can he actually get the car?
Oh,
Yes, yeah. So again, there's other circumstances there. Like, I mean,
But
yeah.
he's not in the habit, and
No.
he's very much a habit.
Yeah. Well, but to your point, where's my brother? Right? Who's got the responsibility there? Right?
I know, I have
Yeah.
no brothers.
Yeah.
But when we were kids, you know, everybody lived within walking
Right.
distance, and when we had a snow day, we
Right.
came up and played in school.
Yep.
But the sisters, the 8:30 mass was the children's mass, and if you didn't come with your parents, you
Right.
sat with your
Sure.
sister
Yeah. Mhm.
of your class,
Mhm.
the nun.
Mhm.
And she knew who was there and
Yeah.
who wasn't, and it was just different back then.
It is. Well, I mean, but to that end, I mean, what's kind of, I've kind of, I don't say I let it go, but I haven't been as maybe critical about this recently. But like, you'll come up after mass, let's say at 5 o'clock or maybe 1 in the morning, let the kids up in the parking lot playing.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, again, where's the charitable assumption? Maybe they went somewhere else. Maybe they're going later, maybe whatever, blah, blah. But I guess the thought too is if you can walk up and actually play in the parking lot,
Mhm.
can't you come over to church? Now,
Senior Shamleffer talked about that
Right.
one day at mass.
we have all been talking about that at those 8 o'clock mass. It's like, it's
Well,
been a common
yeah,
theme here in yeah.
you know, but then, in fact, when we talked about that, you said, but can they go into a church by themselves?
In a building might be a different story. I don't
Well,
know.
you know, it's funny too, when the younger classes do the 8 o'clock mass,
Mhm.
so many parents are here to watch them.
And take pictures.
Well,
But then when they hit 6, 7, 8.
here's the other thing about that too, Mary Ellen. I think, tell you the truth, I like, now I don't know how all things new is going to affect this coming up, but I do like what Ray Fields does.
What do they do?
So during the school year, they add an 8 o'clock mass. They usually just have a 7, but they have eight for the school. But Monday through Thursday, it's like a Monday or Friday here. So in other words, the adults are the ministers, right? Maybe the kids will serve, but the adults are the lectors, they're extraordinary ministers.
Oh,
They do everything as if it were just like a regular daily mass. And I think it exposes them to that habit of daily mass. Now, from what Father Mayo tells me, on Friday is the off school to have the kids do whatever. But what Father Mayo tells me, one of the struggles he's having with his families over there, and now he has more families outside the boundary than we do. They actually not maybe more, but half of their student population lives outside the boundary. He's the complaint he gets from his family, the parents there is that, well, my child's going every day, Father. Why don't you go on Sunday?
This one?
Because it's Sunday. Well, that's the answer. Right. And so it's like, yeah, well, because your obligation is to go on Sunday because that's the Lord's day. That's the day we actually come to, So, and also, are you coming on every day? So I think there's ways you can handle that, but that can be a difficult situation. And maybe that requires a little more bluntness in that approach than maybe, a little more truth than maybe in those situations. But I think I think that's the other thing to keep in mind too. There's a struggle everywhere. One thing that was very evident, and this is where I think this is also where All Things New is kind of trying to head and try to kind of maintain this is their focus of evangelization, is if you look at those, so if you look at the household numbers compared to the mass attendance numbers, in most of the parishes, it's abysmal. It's abysmal. St. Joe Cottleville, for instance, they have about 6,000 families now, some huge number of families. So that's somewhere probably around, let's say there's, I don't know, if there's 6,000 families, say maybe 100,000 people, maybe, right? Give or take. Maybe more like 60,000. I don't know, whatever it is. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Now, how many are going to mass on Sunday based on those, the numbers they were given? Yeah, maybe about 3,000, right? Well, only 3,000 people, not 3,000 families,
Oh,
right? So, okay, that's there. We have somewhere around 15 to 1,800 families when I count it here. I think we were somewhat generous in our numbers that we put on that form, especially coming out of COVID. I think the numbers, well, it seems like they've been going up a little bit, and they tend to do that anyway throughout the year. We're definitely not where we're post-COVID, pre-COVID. I think pre-COVID we're somewhere around 1,000 people that come to mass on Sunday. I think now we're probably closer to the 600 range. But if you're saying we have 1,500 families, well, that's somewhere in the ballpark of like 40,000 people, 30,000 people. And so we're having 500 come to mass, 600 come to mass. Why? Now, there are parishes that actually have more people attending their mass in households. One of which is the old cathedral. It's actually a lot of the personal parishes are that way, but the personal parishes don't have a territory, so it's kind of hard to gauge that. But also a lot of places actually offer, and I know you're going to hate this, Christine, but the traditional Latin mass.
I don't have a problem with it. I just don't understand.
I understand. Yeah, I get it.
You know, I wish I had taken Latin just because
Yeah.
I'm a grammar fiend.
Right,
but-
right.
And I know 0 of my 4 years of Spanish, but. You know, Maria Consuelo goes to Saint
Cecilia's.
Cecilia's.
Right.
And because they're Spanish.
sure.
And, or Mexican, and, but, you know, I was just thinking when we were kids. There were no stores open, even grocery
Yeah.
stores,
that's
there
right.
was,
No, it was a day
Nothing
of rest.
and we
Right.
also did. I mean, if we went somewhere, it was to, another family.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah,
were always St. James.
Yeah, community is really, I
And
mean,
so
you're right.
everybody went
Yeah,
to church together, and the pictures
Right.
of my parents' generation.
Right.
All the men are in their white shirts,
Yeah.
open in
Right.
their suit pants, playing cornhole on the lawn.
I think that's true. I think it's very true. I think there's something to that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's necessarily stuff being open now on Sundays. I think really what you're seeing now, and this is really, I think the impactful thing, it's the God of the sports,
Oh, my
Oh,
God.
right?
sure.
It's that's a big
And
part of
the
it.
computer.
But to your point though, too, I think that's the other thing as well. And that's why I'm saying for those that go, I think it's important to invite. So, you know, you have these families that do come, and praise God they do. But you know, you got a basketball game or a volleyball game or a soccer game or whatever going on that day. Why, hey, when you come to mass with us? You know,
Yeah.
you're best, I think just that simple invitation, not condemning, not saying whatever, but that now I think some families do. And I think they're being kind of rejected, right? And it's been maybe many ways. But I think that if we did that, I think that would be much more engaging and much more conducive. And I don't know if that's really happening as much, right?
Yeah.
Because you're right, there isn't this necessarily like families hang with other families on Sunday, and that's kind of, there's more communal.
Yeah.
And we saw it in the early church, they called it the agape meal, right? That after the mass, they would all get together and actually bring food together and actually have sort of like a family dinner with everybody.
Nick on,
Which was one of
you know,
the things that, one of the issues of the first ecumenical council in Jerusalem was, hey, you know, people are bringing these animals that were sacrificed to food. Can we eat that? Right. And so there was a big question about that. And that was the agape meal. And so even though that was not liturgical, it was still a practice of the early Christians. And so it was like, well, what's kosher, for lack of a better word, of having this meal? What can we do? Right. And that was a big issue.
yeah. But
It is,
we,
it's just
you know,
changing.
it just, you know, I swear I never say these things, but it was a simpler time.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
And there was no air conditioning, so everybody
Sure.
didn't bring
Sure.
work home,
Yeah.
and everybody sat out
Well,
in the yard at night.
Yeah.
And,
And now too, people work 24/7.
That's true. That's true. Right. Right.
My son and his wife would put their kids to bed and then they may work an
Yeah.
hour or two.
Yeah.
Yeah. And which itself is coming to another God too, right? In some ways. Yeah, right.
well, and another thing that I don't know how you would address it through a school, but there are so many families that eat individually
Oh, yeah.
at their. you know,
Well, yeah,
kids in their bedrooms,
I think it was, I think it was one Lent. I can't remember which one it was, but I think it was Ash Wednesday. I kind of brought that up as sort of an example of like kind of what to do, like a Lenten practice. Kind of like, so, yeah. Yeah, it's like, maybe consider having, instead of maybe once a week. Just get together for dinner as a family, right? And starting to go.
the only
Yeah.
time we weren't all together is when one of us found that a friend's having
Right.
better food.
Right.
So we called, can I stay at Judy's house?
Yeah,
Can Judy
yeah.
come to our house?
Well, I think that goes
So
to
we
show,
traded kids,
yeah, I
but-
think it goes to show the foundational building block of the
Yeah.
family, right? I
And
mean, so,
you came home when the street lights.
Right.
Came on,
And you came home for dinner, yeah.
and that was dinner.
It's funny
I mean-
because my daughter-in-law, the first time she came to our house, we sat down, we always had dinner together. No
Yeah.
matter if the kids had sports, I put something in the crock pot.
Yeah,
And he said to my son after dinner, do you do this every night?
yeah,
yeah,
Yes, this is what we do every
Right.
night.
yeah.
Because her parents are divorced.
right.
And her and her mom would sit at a tray table in front of the TV.
But also too, what a great opportunity for evangelization,
Oh, yeah.
right? I mean, I think that's actually part of this too, right? It's like, okay, maybe that's a way
Yeah.
to kind of start there too, right? And so you do what you can in the circumstance you find yourself with the gifts you're given.
And
Yeah.
even just family love.
Yeah.
Is evangelization. Our only bad year was when my brother took biology. That was
I remember there was a
a bad year.
kind of the point you were talking about. There was a time when I was I must have been fourth grade, and one of my friend's parents were out of town, and so we were kind of taking over. So we kind of almost doubled our family size in their house when they were watching them. And what was kind of amazing was the way that like we would have the family dinners, and they were kind of engaged with that. And one thing they weren't used to either was like we would come home and do our homework after school, and they like was kind of fascinating about that though was just spending that so short amount of time with us and our family. These friends of ours, they got better grades, they became more engaged with their own family, and that was something that was kind of fostered. That's unfortunate. I mean, the same way though, the family ended in divorce, and
Oh.
there are things going on there, and so it was like okay, but that I think was a moment of evangelization for them too.
Mhm.
That hopefully they reflect back and say, "Well, it was really working for them. I wonder if that can work for us." I think that's the case. Now, some people might be just ignorant or blind to those things too, right?
Mhm.
Which is why we just have to be vigilant,
Yep,
right? In the way we do these things,
Yeah.
right?
we do that, so
Yeah.
I have a family dinner.
Yeah.
Oh, and my daughter-in-law last, I knew you'd have the table set.
Mhm.
Cause if we go over there, she just pulls the paper plates
Yeah.
out. And,
Right.
you know,
right.
when they come over, I have the 4-year-old granddaughter,
Yeah.
Maggie, I engage.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you set the table for Oma? So
Okay.
she is thrilled. I'm like,
Oh,
here's the board. here's the
Yeah,
napkins."
yeah. I
And
think
you
that's
go with whatever you get and you're appreciative.
you engage everybody. Yeah, I think it's right.
Just, yeah, I love it.
But also what a great symbol also for the Eucharistic table. I mean, so that's the thing. I think, and not being overt necessarily bring that up, but I think there's at least an implied understanding of that.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that's a beautiful example. Like we're talking about, like, how do I do this? Well, do it in a way that
Yeah.
right? Just kind of showing, living authentically is
Mhm.
attractive, and that's what brings people to the faith, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, good. Well, good.
Well,
right.
now I'm gonna have to bring Brandon here because I'm not.
Wonderful.
successful with him.
Wonderful.
Arguing with this kid where evangelizing each other. It's not a kid, it's
How old is he?
33.
Oh, no.
He's